We have so much to talk about today. We're going to wait for people to get in and settle in, get comfortable, hit that like button, send this to your friends, get everybody on board. It's going to be a fun-filled, I don't know, 60, 90 minutes, maybe more, of two bearded Jews. I'm thinking, what do you think about two hirsute Jews talk about politics?
Man, now you're gonna make everyone who watches us get their dictionaries out.
That's true. True. Because there's a great podcast with Jonathan Friedland does with, and I'm forgetting the name of the woman he does it with, called Two Jews on the News. And it's the Unholy Podcast. I think the subtitle's Two Jews on the News. We probably should have gone up with a better name and then another name, and then have the subtitle being Two Bearded Jews Talk Politics. Um,
But I'm terrible in naming. Every so often, I go through the process of should I rename the world according to Brian, something that is less whimsical and more serious. And I go through the AI options, because I'm not good at this. And I'm like, no, I don't like that. I don't like that. This is too long. That's too long. You'd think that be better at this, but no.
yeah, I actually think the World According to Brian is actually pretty good. I actually don't like that, to be honest. I think it's good.
I thought so. There are others in my life who are like, no, nobody knows what this is. Yeah, you got to be more
There is
serious.
that.
But
There is that. It might not be clear to people what exactly it is that you're talking about, but
but that's the whole
nonetheless,
point, right? Like it's like what we're doing. We talk
it,
about whatever we want to talk about.
that is true. We do, and that's what makes it so much fun.
Yeah.
So I want to start off today by talking about. We have a comment there, Larry Stein. Oh, Larry, thank you for glad you're here today. I will check out. I don't usually read Tom Freeman's columns, but I will check that out. I'm going to move slightly the camera.
My
Um,
answer, Michael, to everyone who's like, you got to read this, you got to read that. I got a buddy who sends me stuff every day. Is could you please add a couple of hours of the day? Because I'm
you
already
know,
spending 2 or 3 reading news.
I'm glad you brought this up because I was talking to a friend earlier today, and I said to him, because I've been reading The Lost City of Z by David Grant, and I like David Grant. I really enjoyed Flowers of the what's it called Flower Moon Sunflower
Killer
whatever.
Moon.
Killer Moon, whatever it's called, Killers of the Flower Moon. And I didn't like the
Yeah,
movies much,
yeah.
but I did enjoy the book. And I've been reading that, but I have been reading this book for weeks because it is just my question, I guess, for people is where do you find time to read books? It is so difficult to find the time.
I read in fits and starts. Like I have not touched my book in 2 weeks because every night I'm like, oh, tonight's the night I'm gonna get to an hour of that, and then something else comes up. But I'll have a week like where I get in this groove and I'm stealing every minute I can at night to read, and I read 4 or 5 books in a week, all fiction, light, kind of thing. But I mean, I feel that way about podcasts too. I have people like, have you listened to this podcast? Have you listened to that podcast? Watch this
I know.
show, that show. But
Yeah,
like, I don't think people understand that those of us in this line of work spend hours every day, and it gets longer each year as publications fragment and we get, or the media fragments, and we get more and more publications reading news.
yeah,
I get up every morning, I read Punchbowl, I read Playbook, I scan a couple of other things, then I check Twitter to see what I missed. It just takes a huge amount of time to just stay current with the news, and Donald Trump certainly makes that harder because he's constantly making news.
I mean, I think one thing you have to do is sort of maybe spend less time on social media, but I do find that being on social media, Twitter in particular, is a good way to get access to things that I need to read, that I want to read.
Yeah,
And I just think it just takes up so much of your time. There's podcasts, there's TV, there's movies, there's so many different entertainment forms, and so easily accessible that I just find it so hard to find time to read. And I wish I could. Maybe we could do a book club or something because I need like the impetus to do it. I
I
need to finish
think I
this.
need like 2 years to clear the books just sitting in my bedroom that I haven't
Yeah,
gotten to, and of
that's
like
it's
every day.
it's never gonna happen. It's never gonna
No,
happen.
no. By the way, speaking of social media, if you're out there, click that like button
Yes,
because
please.
that draw makes our audience go up. But I agree with you about Twitter. It's a push pull. On the one hand, I get aggravated all the time, and I spend lots of time scrolling. But on the other, I definitely see stories from places that I wouldn't otherwise see them.
Yeah,
Whether
yeah,
it's something right of center, whether it's a smaller local or regional paper that I wouldn't see otherwise, I definitely get access to a lot of news that I wouldn't see just going to homepages and things like that in the
yeah.
pre-social media days.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's definitely true. I think that is one of the advantages of and following a lot of a diverse group of people. All right,
Yeah.
listen, we're let's sort of get to what's going on in the news. We had a question about the Epstein files and whether DOJ is going to redact them. I want to get to that, but let's first talk about what to me is the most important story. Was the most important story last week, the most important story the week before, and that is Donald Trump's unpopularity. We're talking about politics in America. That is the story, and we have more fresh data today that shows how unpopular Donald Trump really is. According to the new Marist NPR poll, Marist is a pretty reputable pollster.
Yeah.
They have Trump's approval rating, excuse me, at just 39%. That is his lowest since right after the January 6th attack. That's at least according to the Marist poll. Um, Interestingly, 60% blame Trump for the shutdown. 60% think that Trump is not doing enough to lower prices. And on the generic ballot, this is the real whopper. They have Democrats ahead by 14 points. Now, I'm going to be honest and say that feels very outlierish to me. The Democracy Desk polling average has it around 5.5 points, which seems more accurate. Although I think that number might be low, if only because
Mm.
I suspect that is taking into account polling done before the midterm elections, or not midterm, the elections back 2 weeks ago.
We need a better
And
title for the off-year
the
election
off-year
things.
election, yeah, yeah, the New Jersey, Virginia Lollapalooza, because those elections, I think, did indicate to a lot of pollsters that they were perhaps uh, weighing the electorate incorrectly and basing it too much on a 2024 um, turnout as opposed to what we might see in 2025. So, yeah, I did expect Trump's poll numbers, to get a little worse because I thought the weighting would change a bit. So you see worse numbers for Trump. Oh, you've seen that, but 14 points seems a bit high. Nonetheless, it's pretty clear that Trump's numbers are bad, GOP's numbers are bad. And one thing I want to just point out in this poll that I think is a consistent theme in Trump's polling: 48% of those polled strongly disapprove of Trump. That's a huge look. Keanu Reeves joined us. That's nice. 48%.
Keanu, we want to be in your next movie.
Yeah, no, seriously, it was yeah, really enjoyed the what did I see of yours that I enjoyed? I don't know, The Matrix. I didn't like John McCall that much. Sorry, I think he'll leave now. It's too violent. Sorry, Keanu. Anyway, so 40% strongly disapprove of Trump, and that to me, that's a bad number. You could say that's just all the people who voted for Harris. Harris got 48.4% or 3% of the vote. You could say it's all just bad people don't like Trump. But if you have 48% of the country who doesn't like the president, they're probably not voting for a Republican next year, and they're probably going to be motivated to vote against Trump. So I just think it's more evidence, as if we needed more evidence, that Trump is unpopular, and it's really, really hurting the Republican Party.
Two things I would add to that. First, I think it was Jacob Rubscan tweeted this morning. That number sounds like an outlier at first blush, but what it actually would mean is that Republicans don't get any Trump disapprovers, which is
Yeah,
a plausible scenario that that people who disapprove of Trump say, I'm voting against your party. That doesn't always happen. In 2022, Democrats did pretty well with Joe Biden disapprovers, and that's why the bottom didn't drop out for them. But it's certainly a possibility. And we have a couple of other polls out there. The Argument just released their new generic ballot. They had it at minus Democrat D+4 among all voters or among registered voters, and D+7.6 among probably or definitely will vote. And Marquette did their new poll today. They have Trump at, let's see, it's minus 28 on the economy, minus 44 on inflation and the cost of living, which I'm no
wow.
math major, but that's not very good.
No,
And
it's
their
bad.
generic ballot, they had it D+5 among all voters, D+5 among registered voters, and D+9 among likely voters. Now, this is something you're going to see as we go forward, where Democrats are going to do better among likely voters. And what's going to happen is, if you're watching polls, next October, everything you see is going to be likely voters. They're going to have screened it down. This early in the cycle, they don't like to do that because who actually knows that they're likely to vote versus who doesn't know. But it's something to watch because a lot of the name of the game is turnout, right? Those
Yeah.
likely voters, those are the people who are definitely going to turn out. The election was tomorrow, they'd be voting. And Republicans are getting walloped among them.
Yeah.
They have to draw out people who don't know if they're going to vote, who might lean towards them. That's one of the major questions of how big of a wave we see, of whether Republicans have any chance of holding the House, and conversely, whether Democrats have any chance of taking the Senate.
No.
Is do
Yeah.
those registered or even unregistered voters, they're not even voters then, the unregistered Americans turn out to vote because they tend to lean more towards Trump than the people who are definitely or likely voting.
So, on that point, I think, the thing about midterm elections is that there, there's, there's a sort of, how do you put this, gradations of turnout for elections. The most turnout usually is in presidential elections. The next is midterms, then off year elections, then special elections. Midterms do get lower turnout, and they tend to the people who vote in every election, people who are consistent voters. That constituency of people who vote consistently in elections has shifted toward the Democratic Party in the past 10 years. So it's mostly college educated voters that tend to be the ones who are most likely to vote. Not always, but that's that's one group, certainly. That's a group that Democrats have made major inroads with. So I actually think the likely voter scans are probably even now a bit more useful, because I do think that you should assume that if you see registered voters as +5 for Democrats, you probably want to. It's not crazy to suggest that that number could be a bit higher, because you could assume the Democrats are going to get higher levels of turnout. They usually do. Plus, you have a midterm that I assume is going to be not great for Republicans, with lousy polling, which would also suppress Republican turnout. I mean, look, Democrats are what, +13 or +14, I think it is, in off year elections, in special elections this year. That
Something like
is
that.
that's a turnout issue. That is, and that's twofold. One is Democratic voters, again, as I said a second ago, are more likely to vote. They're more consistent voters, but also Democrats are, pissed off, and they are more inclined to get to the polls and to vote against Trump. So I think that, when I look at the congressional ballot, I see a 5 point advantage. I think to myself, that's probably a 7 or 8 point advantage for Democrats, just because of the likeliness to vote. So I look, we're a year away, but here's the thing. In all honesty, we usually have a pretty good idea how these things are going to go by sort of January. And, if the polling suggests that the president's unpopular and the incumbent party is unpopular, it's hard to change that, actually. And that usually kind of remains relatively consistent through the year. So I just don't. If I'm a Republican, I'm very, very concerned. And if I'm in anything, I don't know, Trump +8 or less district, I'm seriously concerned that I might lose my job.
Yeah, and I mean, let's be honest about it. And this is somewhat of a systemic flaw in our electoral system, which is we have these very big, broad presidential electorates, 60, 65, 67% show up and they elect a president.
Not
And
even that
then
high, is it?
not
That seems
sometimes
high.
that's on the high end. But then we
That's
have a
Biden level.
midterm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Then we have a midterm election 2 years later, and perpetually that turnout drops dramatically. And the people who come out there's two phenomena. There's the one Michael's talking about, which is that we've seen a switch over the last over the Trump era,
Yeah.
from Republicans benefiting in low turnout special elections or low turnout elections because it was their voters who showed up, to Democrats benefiting because the big division is educational attainment. Do people have degrees? It's those wealthy suburbanites who show up in midterms, right? And Democrats used to benefit from bigger turnout because it was drawing out people of color, with lower educational attainment levels and things like that, who didn't pay that much attention. Now, for Republicans, a lot of it is that it's white voters with lower educational attainment who show up. So that's one piece. But then there's the other piece, which is every time we have a midterm, almost without fail, it's the people who are angry who show up, the people who
Yeah.
lost 2 years
Yeah.
earlier, and the
Yeah.
people who elected the guy and said, "Hey, do this stuff." They don't come out. So that presidencies more and more, if you're lucky, you get a trifecta for 2 years. You could do things, and after that, the midterms wallop you. And we saw with Barack Obama, you get another 6 years, you don't do a whole heck of a lot of much. Um, so I think that that's the phenomenon. The only exception is when you get what I call an exogenous shock to the system. So like the Dobbs decision, where in June,
That's the
we
to be clear, that's the decision overturning Roe versus Wade.
right, and that came in June of a midterm year. And so that shifted the terrain. But otherwise, Michael's right that, these things lock in a lot earlier than you think. If you're in trouble by like Memorial Day at the latest of an election year, it just doesn't swing. Usually, if polls are going to move, they're going to start moving by the spring. And that was sort of when I started to shift on Joe Biden and on Democrats, is when things didn't start to move around Memorial Day. It was a sign that things were going in the wrong direction. Things were
Yeah.
bad. That's sort of like the last point, that the last escape hatch of like, hey, can you dig this out of your way out of this hole? If it's not happening by the spring, it's not going to happen.
Can I make one more point? You referenced the tweet by Jacob Rubashkin about saying maybe this plus 14 congressional ballot is not an outlier, and that it just reflects people who don't like Trump, and that Trump disapprovers are basically not, they're voting almost uniformly for Democrats. And he says that 2022 is an exception to that because a lot of Biden disapprovers voted for Democrats. And I sort of made a point to him on saying this to him, like, I wonder if the reason for that is that Republicans paid a penalty in 2022 for having a lot of really poor candidates: Herschel Walker, Blake Masters, Kerry Lake, a bunch of other, Doug Mastriano. And so a lot of Biden disapprovers were turned off by Republican candidates. Now, that could happen, this cycle with Democrats. But the thing is, outside of maybe Maine, we'll see what happens there. I don't know that Democrats are generally pretty good about not nominating really poor candidates. Now that might change, but I haven't seen a lot of evidence of it yet that they are, especially in Senate races. Just like you look at the most competitive Senate races, and they've gotten the candidates they've wanted. There's no primary challenge to John Ossoff in Georgia, or who else is in a Democrat is up for reelection.
They all
Mm,
retired. The ones who that would have been competitive, Gene Shaheen's retiring, Gary
yeah,
Peters is retiring.
yeah, it's true. Yeah.
There's not a they're very Ossoff's really it in terms of incumbents at risk.
No, it's true, but again, not getting a primary challenge, and I think I guess the point is that I don't see a lot of evidence of weak candidates, of Democrats having a weak candidate problem. Now that could happen, and all it takes is one weak candidate, like in Maine, to really screw up your chances of taking, like, for example, taking back the Senate. But I'm not seeing a ton of evidence that that's the problem, the same level of a problem for Democrats that it was for Republicans in 2022, and it was a major problem for Republicans in 2022. There's no question about it.
I I
Um,
would I'd
yeah,
agree with
go ahead.
that with one caveat. I think we have a lot of these House seats that are competitive where you've got like four, five, six-way Democratic primaries. And so I worry a little bit more about nominating the wrong candidate in those kinds of races, because you're
Sure.
talking about somebody's going to get 22% and win. I hate the system where you get 12% of the electorate shows up in a primary, and you have a 5 or 6 way primary, and voila, somebody who got 21% of a very small turnout is your nominee. But that's the
Right.
system we have in a lot of places. And I think you're going to have to see the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee get much more aggressive come spring in some of those races, because there's real risk when you have primaries that are that fractured and splintered, as opposed to a one-on-one kind of thing.
Yeah. Let's move on a little bit here to talk about. Um, we had a conversation before we went on the air about Trump's really bad week that for any other president would have been like epically bad, but is for Trump is just kind of forgotten about. And so first we had the Epstein vote in the House, major embarrassment to the Trump administration. Trump, of course, had resisted this for, I mean, for months now. It's called it a hoax, criticized Republicans who were basically wanting to open the files, brought Lauren Boebert to the Situation Room to sit down with Kash Patel and Pam Bondi. By the way, like, worst dinner party ever, and and to put the hard sell on her, and she said no to them. um, so a couple things. So the Epstein, so that was the first thing. Then he brings MBS, Saudi Arabian leader, to the White House, makes really crude remarks about Jamal Khashoggi, who, of course, MBS ordered his murder and dismemberment. Kind of blamed it on him. Uh, Something
Bad
else he
things
did.
happen, Michael.
Yeah, he said things happen. Like, it's like, look, Khashoggi tripped and fell into a bone saw and dismembered himself. I mean, it's his own fault, really. Look where you're walking, buddy. So, but let's talk about the Epstein thing because I think one thing about this case, and I wrote a little bit about this week in my Substack, Truth and Consequences. If you're not a subscriber, please subscribe. And I said I don't really understand Trump's position on this because there really hasn't been these emails that came out last week. There really wasn't any evidence in there that. I mean, there were some hints, tantalizing hints, but nothing that suggested Trump did anything wrong related to Epstein, that he had relationships with young girls, as Epstein did, or even he was aware of Epstein's trafficking. And I'm sort of very suspicious and I shouldn't say suspicious, I was skeptical that there's anything in these DOJ files that's going to implicate Trump. So I don't just actually understand so much why he's been opposing this. But in doing so, he's really, I think, hurt himself politically because he looks like he has something to cover up. And by the way, just to get to this point really quickly, because Lynn Mustrom asked about will these files be redacted, I just want to say for the record, if there's anything in these files that is in any way embarrassing to Trump, I have zero doubt that Pam Bondi will, burn it because these people have no moral core whatsoever. So obstructing justice on behalf of Trump is certainly not something that's gonna phase them. So I don't really think anything. I think these files are going to be released. And it's going to be a giant nothing burger, which really makes his position on this hard to figure because in doing this, he's backed himself into a corner. He actually lost this fight and has really weakened, I think, his power within the Republican Party.
I mean,
Over Republican Party, I should say. Over.
I think there's three possibilities. There is the sensationalist possibility that there is something there that he's talking
Sure.
about pardoning
Sure.
Maxwell. I would put that at a very, very, very low percentage, like 1% chance
Can I
kind of
ask you
thing.
about that? If he pardons Maxwell, like, is that the end of his presidency?
No, because he's Donald Trump. I mean, we were talking about this. I did a video on this for my subscribers, The World According to Brian, on Monday about how last week was a terrible week for Trump. It showed all his corruption and things, and then it just got worse. Like, this is the guy who there are 50 things that would end the presidency of anybody else, but it's all like baked in with him.
I think pardoning Maxwell would be uh, a major political problem for him.
Well, I
I
mean,
Lynn's right. The base would go absolutely freaking nuts if he
right,
did it.
right, right. Lynn, I agree with you. I'm just saying that I've seen a lot of things that this guy has done that would have ended any other presidency, and 2 weeks later he bounces back.
But that's why the
Um,
Epstein story is different because it's a story that actually his base is really energized about and doesn't agree with him on. Like I think that's the issue.
right,
They don't like his position on Epstein.
right, and I mean the second possibility is that he's just being oppositional. Democrats decide to push this, so he's digging in because he does that on everything. And
Right.
then the third possibility is that this is about he comes from that wealthy, moneyed Palm Beach sect. These are the people he's hanging out with at Mar-a-Lago every weekend. They're in his ear, and he's very easily influenced by the last person in his ear. One reason that he's governed, I think, more as a traditional conservative than some have expected is that the Republicans have figured out that if you get in his ear, you can kind of control what he
Yeah.
does. Well, there may be people in his ear about Epstein who either have legal liability or who don't want their whole sort of social circle dragged through the mud, who are
Sure.
in his ear saying, "Sir, this can't get out. This is going to be bad." But it was a monumental blunder of dragging this out for months on end,
Yeah.
and making this a story. And the thing is, it weaves very nicely with a lot of the other stuff that he's doing. Um, Pardon power. I go back to Mark Rich, and those of you who are younger are gonna have no idea who the hell I'm talking about.
Yeah.
But Mark Rich was some wealthy Democratic donor who Bill Clinton pardoned on his way out of office, and that was like a huge story. Even though he had was done, his presidency was over. Trump is having like 5 Mark Riches a week, and nobody even notices. Last week
Nobody
there was a
cares.
January 6er who he had pardoned already. But the pardon didn't work, Michael, because he also had a separate gun charge that he was stuck in
So
jail
you,
on.
so you pardon him for that.
Yeah, he pardoned him for that too. There was the husband of a Republican congresswoman last week got pardoned.
Yeah.
Daryl Strawberry, the old Mets slugger. Like he's handing pardons out to his
Well,
supporters like they're
you mentioned the Binance guy, the Chinese crypto guy
oh yeah, I
who
forgot the
they
Chinese
got.
crypto guy. Trump never heard of him, Michael. He doesn't know who he is.
He literally said on 6 Minutes he never heard of the
That's
guy.
what I know. That's what I'm saying. But like, he's handing out pardons in the most corrupt way that anyone has ever done.
It's
Then
crazy.
you have his misogyny. We haven't even gotten.
Oh, I didn't
126.
mention
We're
that. Sorry, I forgot
26
about that.
minutes in, and the president of the United States told a female reporter, Catherine Lucy from Bloomberg, quote unquote, "Shut up, piggy." If George
No,
W.
he
Bush,
said no. He said quiet piggy.
quiet, piggy. Quiet piggy. If George W. Bush or Barack Obama had done that, there'd be people calling for them to resign today. Like
Yeah.
that would have been the story of yesterday. Um, and like I didn't think the gender gap could get worse, but maybe it can. He's
Can,
trying really hard
can
to
I
do
just?
that.
I want to interject one thing about this. That the White House, like I guess the press office, their response when they were pushed on this was that, well, Lucy, this reporter, was rude to Trump. And I gotta say, these people are like children. This is what my children would say. Not even now, a couple of years ago, if I said somebody like, "Why did you mean that person?" Well, they were mean to me first. Like, what is going on? Like, seriously, like this is like what a child responds to when they do something wrong. The complete refusal to take responsibility. He should apologize. It just could
And
be a slip of the tongue. He could, yeah, but he's not going to apologize. And for the White House to defend it by blaming the reporter, I mean, these people are just the worst fucking people, and they have
then,
no morals and no ethics whatsoever.
then they went after Mary Bruce, the chief White House correspondent for ABC, for asking about Khashoggi in front of MBS, like threatening to take their broadcast license
Because
away.
Trump said that he was being rude to his guest.
Right.
She was being rude to his guest.
Like,
What?
first of all, he doesn't know how the system works. But second of all, that you're right. I saw somebody tweet this yesterday. It's true. Donald Trump does things every day that most people would not tolerate from their 5-year-olds.
No.
That is absolutely. I mean, shut up, piggy, or quiet piggy is this misogynistic and obnoxious
Just
thing.
rude. Yeah.
Rude. Especially because I saw some great memes where it was turned on Trump, where they had a pig mask on Trump that somebody did an AI thing. And like, he's not exactly a physical specimen to be commenting on other people's
No.
appearances, but like the misogyny and the rudeness and the total failure to
The
understand the job of the press.
the complete lack of class that these people.
Right,
It's not
right,
just
right.
him though.
The,
It's people
right,
around him
right,
too
right.
who defend
But
this.
that's how that was the number one qualification for getting hired this time around, was, are you a classless piece of crap, right? Like, Stephen Chung, that guy is just an internet
Oh,
troll. I
he's
mean,
awful.
he's
He's
just
awful.
awful, obnoxious, rude. Caroline Levitt. It's like they sit around high-fiving each other by who can be more juvenile and obnoxious.
Do you know this thing
Um,
a couple weeks ago that like they would something some reporter asked a question and they responded with a "your mom"
yes,
line,
I was about to go with
and
that.
then
Yeah,
like State Department like did the same thing. Like I thought that they thought it was cool. Like people are really like children. I mean, it is like they
they're not
diminish us as a
competent
country
professionals.
they're not competent, but they diminish us as a country every single day. It is
Right,
an
right, right. I
embarrassment to
mean,
have you in charge.
there are two qualifications to getting hired in the Trump 2 administration. One is, are you an obnoxious piece of crap juvenile? And
Yes.
two is, are you willing to be subservient and do whatever you're told, even if that might be illegal and might put you at legal risk? And though that's it. I mean, you see it with Kesh Patel, you see it with Pam Bondi, you see it with like JD Vance. We have a fucking shit posting troll, and
Yeah.
the
As vice president.
absolutely, I lean into both expletives there because that's what he is. This is a guy who is out there like sticking up for white supremacists and picking fights on social media. Like, don't you have something better to do, JD? Isn't there a funeral of some third tier world leader for you to go represent the United States? I mean, that's what vice presidents used to do.
Yeah, I know. It's I don't know. I mean, I know we're digressing here, but it just is like sort of I don't know. It's a sad statement about where we are as a country. That
And
but
by
just for
the
the record, but I'll say one thing about this that like we knew this about Trump. I mean, there's a tweet I always think about. Uh, a guy, I think he wrote this in like 2019 or 2020, and he posted a video of Trump mocking a New York Times reporter who had physical
yeah,
disability, and said it
yeah,
should have been
yeah.
over then. It should have been over
Right,
right then
right,
and
right.
there,
I
and it
mean,
wasn't. And that's how we have this just a horrible human being as our president, a horrible
right.
person.
Once we breached that line, it
Yeah,
did two things. first of all, was the message, especially this time around, to the media was nobody cares about his lack of ethics. Nobody cares about how crass
Yeah,
and coarse and unrefined
that
and
he's a
awful.
felon, right?
Right. That he's a felon. Nobody cares about that, so don't pay attention to it. And the less attention it gets, the more people just sort of bake it in as ho hum. That's Donald
Yeah,
Trump. We knew he was a misogynist. We knew he was this. We knew he was that. Now, look, some of that is definitely reflected in the approval ratings, right? Like it was covered by people who thought, oh, I think he's a terrible person, but he's going to do right by me economically. And those people are feeling the most scorned right now.
yeah.
And they are, I think that's why the approval rating is dropping. But there's a lot of people who they just excuse this, and then the media says, well, okay, then this is not really a story. But again, I do think it's worth emphasizing. If any other president in our lifetime had said quiet piggy to a female reporter, it would have been the headline in the New York Times next day,
Yeah,
banner headline, quiet
yeah.
piggy. And it would have been president raises questions about his, his misogyny or something like that. Like it would have been the story
But
that
I
all anyone could talk about today.
but I think the larger point is that Barack Obama, even George W. Bush, Ronald Reagan, Joe Biden, things would Bill Clinton.
No,
They wouldn't.
it's not about
They wouldn't do those things.
even
They wouldn't do
Richard
those
Nixon,
things.
who was a terrible person, probably wouldn't have done that. And,
Lyndon
and I mean,
Johnson might have. Lyndon Johnson.
Lyndon Johnson's the one who was coarse enough that he might have. But and I think it's worth noting tomorrow we're going to get a reminder of the old way. I think it's tomorrow. There's a funeral for Dick Cheney. Joe Biden is going. George W. Bush is going to memorialize his former vice president. And Donald Trump will, of course, not be there, which it would have been unprecedented for any other
Well,
president.
let me just say for the record, Dick Cheney was a horrible person, and Dick Cheney did horrible things as vice president. And I know you're not supposed to speak ill of the dead, but I don't really believe that if the person's in public service, they do terrible things. Dick Cheney did terrible things, and I understand like people like to be clubby or when these kind of things happen, but let's be honest about who Dick Cheney was.
Well, let me disagree ever so slightly. And
Okay,
I emphasize the ever so slightly. I think he did terrible things. I don't think he was a terrible person in that I think his motives were actually good. I think he just was terrible and did terrible things from the right place. Everything I've ever heard about the man, and honestly, the best thing I've heard about him in the last week and a half is how he treated staff when you consider how Trump treats people. But that's not even my point is that everything I've read indicates that he sincerely believed he was doing right by America.
so
um,
what? I don't give a
but
shit.
no,
He believed it was right to torture people and to literally bypass congressional laws
look,
that exist against torture and
I,
warrantless
I
wiretapping
hold,
and mislead
I,
about the war in about the reason to go to war in Iraq. I mean, he did all of those things. People died because of his
right,
decisions.
right, right. Look,
I'm
I
sorry, like
wholeheartedly agree. I think it's worth in a Trump era differentiating between someone's motives and someone's actions and the consequences of their action. He owns his actions and the consequences, and his record is terrible. History will remember him very poorly. Okay. The only person he looks good next to is Donald Trump.
but
But
okay.
I guess what I'm saying to you is I think we have to differentiate levels of terrible in the Trump world. And we need to do that because the people who are out there today on the Republican scene, led by Donald Trump, are their motives are terrible. They know they're doing wrong and they do it anyway. That
Well,
is different from somebody who thinks they are doing the right thing for the country and it's a
I
bad thing.
I think I don't buy that distinction at all. I'm sorry. I mean, I just think that in the case of Cheney, you know, he believed that the 1% chance of a terrorist attack justified invading Iraq. It justified torturing people against violating U.S. law. It justified, basically ignoring congressional prerogatives. It justified all kinds of terrible things. And I don't care if his motivation was he wanted to do good for America. He was wrong. And he went about it in a way that did enduring damage to this country and
I
killed
agree with
lots
you.
and lots of people. And I didn't even
I
get into, by the way, all the things he did as vice president to block efforts to deal with climate change. And that may be the worst part of both W and Cheney's legacy. So the reality is that Dick Cheney, this argument that his intentions were pure, Kissinger's intentions were pure. So what? I mean, JLBJ's intentions were pure. So what in Vietnam? So what? I'm sorry,
I
but I don't find that even even a appropriate defense of what
I
Cheney did.
I I don't see it as defense, Michael. I see it as a distinction to try to be as accurate as I can about the fact that there are two
Okay.
types of bad people in public life. There are people who are incompetent and misguided, who do stupid things and bad things and terrible things with awful consequences. And there are a lot of them. I think Ronald Reagan did a lot of things that were terrible and had awful consequences and hurt people.
Yeah.
And I can go down the line. But I draw the distinction for two reasons. One, I think that the minute you start saying that motives don't matter, I think that we've gotten so polarized and we started to see the other side as an enemy because we see them as like pure unadulterated evil. And I think that some of that comes from not saying, hey, these are people who want to do right, who end up doing wrong because they're misguided.
But
Okay. And
his motivations were wrong. His motivation, right? I mean, for Cheney, his belief that the threat to America was so profound that he had this 1% doctrine was simply wrong. He was simply incorrect about the
I
threats
agree.
that. But
I
and by the way, because he believed this and was convinced of this, he was impervious to information that said to him that he was wrong. And so
I agree.
but we should move on because we don't want someone to have Dick Cheney. But
No,
I think Dick
no,
Cheney, people are going to praise him when his funeral's tomorrow. They're going to praise him and they're
good
going to
show.
give him props. And the reality of the matter is that Dick Cheney was a bad guy who did lots of bad things, who did enduring damage to this country, and in some ways, he did even more enduring damage to this country than Donald Trump has done, as heartily as
I
that may be.
I absolutely agree that the consequences were catastrophic and that he did a lot of bad things. All I'm trying to say is I think that if you don't make that distinction, you ignore how much worse today's Republicans are
It's just
than
a
the
different
people who
kind of
screwed up in
worse.
the past.
It's just a different kind of worse.
I try to see the difference between motives and actions and consequences, but that's again, like I'm not saying it's sort of the difference between Lyndon Johnson and the segregationists. The segregationists were evil, their motives were bad. Lyndon Johnson didn't have the courage to pull out of Vietnam, even though he knew that he probably wasn't going to win the war because didn't have the guts to do it.
Look
That was bad.
What Lyndon Johnson did in Vietnam was I mean, evil is a strong word, but it was pretty horrible. And frankly, Barack Obama did in sending surge troops to Afghanistan in December of '09, even though he really didn't think that they were going to succeed, was also terrible. I mean, I don't defend any of these presidents for the things that they do when people's lives are lost because of their decisions. And I'm just saying, the case of Cheney, the loss of life, the loss of American credibility, the loss of opportunity cost of going to war in Iraq, all of those things have just done enormous
I
damage to this
mean,
country.
you didn't
And by
even
the
mention.
way, the guy basically, you know, uh, uh, allowed torture, allowed Americans to, in our name, the name of us as American citizens, to torture people, to violate the law. I'm sorry, but like, there's no
I
defense of
mean,
it.
and you didn't even mention the two things that I think he did that were the worst, which was the unitary executive theory. A lot of Cheney was pushing the idea of an executive that the Trumpian people or the Trump people are now bringing to fruition from the 1970s. I mean, he said it when Ronald Reagan was under fire for the Iran Contra stuff, and he was the top Republican on the investigative committee. He did a lot of wrong with that, and then not to mention the fact that the budgetary implications of Iraq are part of why we haven't been able to do anything, why we struggle to deal with the economic crisis in 2008 and 2009, why we're limited in what we can do in other policy areas. I absolutely agree with you that he did awful things. His record is reflects that, and history is going to judge him incredibly unkindly. I'm simply saying I think that from an accuracy standpoint, we're better off drawing distinctions
Well, I
between the,
look,
the people whose motives were bad and the people whose motives might have been right, but they got everything wrong.
I think you're making an argument that I actually find a lot of people make um, to defend decision making, particularly on foreign policy, that I just find really problematic. I just think this argument that their intentions were good, but their execution was bad, I think it's a dodge. I think it's a dodge about because it doesn't reflect the fact that there were people at the time who looked at the same information that Dick Cheney and George W. Bush looked at and concluded we shouldn't go to war in Iraq. We shouldn't torture people. We shouldn't, engage in warrantless wiretapping. We shouldn't escalate the threat from Al Qaeda to the point where it impacts civil liberties. People said that, and Trump ignored them. It's like the argument, sort of, about people like I don't know. This is a bad analogy, but you talk about anti-abolitionists or people during the Civil War who were or pre-Civil War who were sort of their motives were good, try to avoid a civil war, even if it meant supporting slavery. I mean, that's a bad analogy, but you know what I mean. The point is, like, no, what things they did were wrong, and their motives are irrelevant to me. They are absolutely irrelevant to me. You know, if you were doing something that you know is wrong, that you know is illegal, that is going to get people killed, people hurt, and you do it anyway, uh, even because you think it's the best course of action, you can defend it as why you did it, but those actions are still wrong and they're still damaging. And I'm not going to give Dick Cheney a pass for that. But we should move on because we don't want to have a Dick Cheney the whole
I
time.
one sentence answer that has
Sure,
nothing to
sure.
do with Cheney. I think by that standard, then just about every president and vice president in American history, even the ones we consider to be good, were terrible. If you
No, no,
can't
no,
draw,
no, 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 no. First of all of them have things they've done that are terrible.
okay, all right.
Barack Obama escalating in Afghanistan was terrible, but he did other things that counterbalance that. But that particular decision was terrible and it's indefensible and it's immoral in my view. But that doesn't mean that. But you judge it by the totality of his actions. And with Cheney, I could look. I didn't even get into Afghanistan. I've written a lot about this. I read a project for this. I mean, he probably was the reason. I mean, there were opportunities to make peace with Taliban that he opposed, and his opposition is what led to the civil war that basically led to Taliban taking over power. But that's a whole other conversation. I want to okay. We've talked a lot about Epstein and Trump, and I think we're at 43 minutes in. So let's hit on some other things I think are really important to talk about today. If that's okay, unless you have something else you want to add to this.
No, I mean, the only thing I would say is if people are interested in this topic, this is actually a topic that historians are now fighting over. There was a book last year, Confronting Saddam Hussein by Mel Leffler, who's a tremendous historian, a friend of mine,
Sure.
mentor. And I actually think this was the entire crux of the argument that we're having. And now I understand it better because there are people who said that Leffler was kind of co-opted by the uh, Bush people, that they did interviews with him and he was, became too sympathetic to them. Whereas I've always thought, this is a really harsh critique because he says that basically they absolutely uh, botched everything that came after the invasion, that they didn't put the effort into planning and that they were catastrophic consequences. And I've always been like, I just think it's a different critique. But what you're saying helps me to understand better that that people who see those of us who are drawing those distinctions about motives as defending, or as excusing something. And people should read the book, think about it themselves, but it really is just two different sides of bad, I guess, is
I
how
mean,
we
it's
look at it.
interesting. I'll make one digression here. I mean, I wrote a book about the '68 election. I spent a lot of time looking to LBJ in Vietnam, and I had been somewhat sympathetic to LBJ on Vietnam before I did my research into it. And the more I looked into it, the more I concluded that he was a monster and that he didn't believe the war could succeed. He was told by people around him, including most prominently his vice
Mitchell
president,
Russell.
but most prominently Hubert Humphrey in '65, who told him the escalation of Vietnam was a mistake. He did it anyway. He did it largely for political reasons. And even when it was clear that the war was lost, people like Robert McNamara, and people forget this because Denver gets a bad rap to some extent, came out in '67 and said, look, we need to end the war. We need to get out of Vietnam. We're losing. He rejected it. And so from my perspective, the thing that I look at someone like Johnson, you know, you can argue that the decision to go to war was wrong, but certainly it was a mistake that could have been fixed. Instead, he doubled down on a bad policy and made it worse. And same thing, of course, happened with Cheney and Bush, with Iraq, with the war on terrorism. So I guess I think Johnson's motives. I don't. I think Johnson, his heart was his motives were good, but that doesn't. It's like that plus a quarter gets you a newspaper. Well, not anymore gets you a newspaper, but it used to. But like it doesn't really matter if like you ignore evidence to the contrary. If you shut out voices that tell you that you are misjudging the situation, that you silo what kind of information you do receive. I mean, LBJ made choices on this, and I think the same thing can be said of Bush and Cheney. But we really okay. We can
But
spend all day.
and
Yeah,
every American president has their foreign policy records are bad, Michael. The foreign
some
policy is
no
the
no
area.
some more than others. Some more than others. I mean,
Some more than others, but like I can't point to anyone with the possible exception of Jack Kennedy who I could say, hey, this guy really got it and understood it. And even he had the disastrous summit with Khrushchev in
Khrushchev.
Berlin. Yeah, I mean, like you go back through history and the records on foreign policy are ghastly.
You want to
Uh,
hear? So, for the record, I did this a couple years ago. I did a piece for the Atlantic on the best foreign policy presidents, and I had like FDR as number one. I put Reagan up there because he basically, I think
ended the
people
Cold War.
he really kind of ended the Cold War. He gets. I think a lot of liberals hate that argument, but it's actually kind of true. I always said JFK because he
Yeah.
dealt with the Cuban Missile Crisis so brilliantly, and the thing about the Cuban Missile Crisis people don't realize is that every single one of his staff, the
One.
Pentagon,
Yep.
National Security Council wanted to attack in Cuba, even his own brother, and he opposed it. It's incredible.
Yeah.
Um, Even George H.W. Bush, who I had some problems too, but generally was pretty good. The bad ones, Carter was bad, Nixon was bad. Although Nixon, China, I mean, did some good things too. Um, uh, but yeah, no one's hands are clean because inevitably, on foreign policy, you end up having to make tough decisions where people get hurt, get killed. But you sort of have to balance those things. And the thing is, with like Obama, I am highly critical of his escalation in Afghanistan, very very critical, and as one should be, and critical of other aspects too. But I think by and large, his foreign policy was pretty good, and he was a pretty good foreign policy president. W is, in my opinion, maybe the worst. I don't know anyone. I think he probably is the worst. Not just because he made bad decisions. He doubled down on bad decisions, didn't retreat from making bad decisions, and I think in a sense, what's the word? Compounded his errors. So
Yeah.
that's pretty bad. But
Let's
let's
move
move
on.
on. Let's move on. Okay, so it's a couple of things I want to talk about. Tennessee is having a special election in 3 weeks, I think, 2 or 3 weeks, December 2nd. So after the
Yeah. 2 weeks basically.
2 weeks. And
Right. Yeah, yeah.
so,
Two less than 2 weeks now.
so you flagged this race for me about a month ago, and I looked at it and kind of concluded, there's not going to be much here. But something very interesting happened in the last week or so. First of all, the NRCC, the National Republican Campaign Committee, Congressional Committee, uh, put a significant investment into the race for their candidate Matt Van Epps, who's the Republican candidate. They also two outside PACs put in one put in $600,000 on behalf of Van Epps to help his campaign. Now, here's the thing: I think this race was going to be closer. And look, first of all, there's a Trump 20 plus 22 district, so one should conclude from that it would be a hard win for Democrats to win. And Tennessee Republicans carved up the district, so part of Nashville is in this district that's more Democratic, but they added all these rural areas that are more Republican to make it so that Republican would hold the seat. So plus 22, as I said, you could say, okay, Democrats overperform. They've been overperforming by like 13 or 14 points in special elections. But even if they do that, they're still going to lose this race. But the investment of money from outside groups on behalf of the Republican candidate tells me they're concerned. You don't put money into the race unless you are concerned. Now, it could be they're concerned the race will be close and it will add to the narrative about Republicans being in trouble, and it might contribute to more Republicans, for example, not running for reelection. Or they could be concerned that Van Epps could lose. So I think there is something going on in this election. And one more thing I want to bring up, I want to get your comments on this, but one more thing is Kamala Harris was in Nashville. Hold on. Before you speak, I talked to people about this. She was in Nashville doing an event with the Bulwark, I believe,
Forward.
about for her new book. And she she went to a canvassing event on behalf of the Democratic candidate, Afton Ben. And This got a lot of coverage in the New York Times. I think it's a people making a bigger deal out of it than it is because she basically was in town and that's why she did this. But it's her first appearance for a candidate since the 2024 election. A lot of people criticize it. I talked to folks on the ground in Tennessee about this. And the response I got was, look, this is a turnout election, right? The only way that Bain wins this election, she's a Democrat, the only way she wins is if Democrats get enormous turnout and Republicans stay home. And the theory is that Kamala Harris, although she might be anathema to Republicans, she's the kind of person who could mobilize Democrats to vote. And that is the calculation, almost certainly, that the Bain campaign is making. I am I have a hard time criticizing it because I'm not on the campaign and I don't look at the polls that they're looking at. And I assume the Bain people had a reason for doing this and the reason for seeing that Harris as more positive, that the positives of her being there outweighed the negatives.
I just shake my head. That Marquette poll that I mentioned to you before, they polled favorability of various political figures in that Marquette poll. Zohran Mamdani -9, RFK Jr. -11, JD Vance -16, Donald Trump -17, Kamala Harris -19. She had the worst favorable or unfavorable of any person they
I'm
polled.
sorry, what was Harris again? I'm sorry.
She was -19. She was worse than Trump. She was worse than Vance. She was worse than everybody.
Right, but where is she
Um,
among Democrats?
that I did not see a number for, but and I think you're right that she's much more popular among Democrats. But here's the thing: I think that bringing Harris in reflects a Democratic Party that still has this muscle memory of we want turnout. This is an election where the lower the turnout, the better the chances for Democrats are. Because the people who are most likely to vote in a special election less than a week after Thanksgiving, and early voting is open now. If you live in this district, go vote. Um,
Yeah.
are are highly educated people who are really tuned in, and you bring in Harris, and now that's getting attention, and it's going to gin up the Republicans just as much as the Democrats.
Well, but the race is already getting attention. I mean, that train's left the station on that one. And so I think the conclusion is that look, the only way that she can win this race, Afton Bain, is if Democrats come out in just enormous numbers and enough Republicans stay home. So you're making this calculation that whatever Harris does to rile up Republicans is outweighed by how much she motivates Democrats. I mean, look, yeah, this
No, you're
reminds
right
me,
about the calculation. That's
but
absolutely the calculation.
I think the thing is I am a little bit hesitant to criticize them. I'm reminded of Katie Hobbs. Yeah, Hobbs or Dobbs. I was getting confused with
Hobbs, governor
Hobbs.
of Arizona, yeah.
I got it right the first time. That's good. Katie Hobbs, when she ran for governor against Carrie Lake, she refused to debate Lake, and I remember a lot of Democrats, pundits, not from Arizona, who criticized her for doing that. Said it was, it's a stupid thing to do. She should debate Lake, what have you. You know, my sort of take at the time was these people are not idiots, right? They could be idiots, but the chances are they're not idiots, and they have a reason for why they're taking this position. And I should trust them to know what they're doing. And as it turned out, not why she won, but she did win the race. And I guess my point is like something like this. I kind of feel I saw this story and I'm like, whoa, that seems like a really bad idea. But then I asked a few people, talked to a few folks, and they said they saw the reason for it. And my default is, people who work for Afton Bain know more about her district and that race than I do, and I have to kind of trust them to know what the hell they're doing. And so if they think this is the right move, maybe it's the right move.
We've seen too many bad campaigns for me not to Monday morning quarterback some of this
That's
stuff.
fair. That's
Um,
fair.
and
That's
look,
fair.
let's be honest. A win for Afton Bain in my book is if she gets within like 7 points. Okay, I am not expecting Democrats to win this race. If they do, it will be a monumental
It'll be an
political
earthquake.
earthquake.
It'll be an earthquake.
We will sit here and spend nothing. We'll spend like an hour talking about this race on the 3rd of December if that's what would have happened. Um, I think if she gets within even 6, 7 points, now you're starting to talk about
Six,
those.
seven, six.
eh,
Sorry,
I still
sorry.
don't know what that is, but
My kids love it. That's all I know.
I'm I'm an old man. I'm out of touch. But I think that you get into the high single digits, all of a sudden those people in the Trump plus 10, plus 12 districts feel very uncomfortable.
No,
Um,
I think that's right. Right. I mean, the one thing that members of Congress hate more than anything else is a competitive election. And so if a plus 22 seat is competitive and let's say, like you said, like it's 6 or 7 points, I mean, that would suggest that anybody who's in a Trump plus 15 district could be in trouble. Now, again, a special election is different, different
you're
levels
gonna
of
have
turnout.
lower turnout, much lower turnout than you're gonna get in the midterms.
Yes, exactly. One thing I will just mention is that in the primary, there were 36,000 voters who turned out in Republican primary and about 30,000 for Democrats. Both sides had competitive primaries. One of the arguments I do hear from Democrats on this is that, well, look, she got almost as many people to turn out for Democratic primary what is a very red district. The turnout levels were not that dissimilar, which would suggest that there's a higher level of enthusiasm among Democrats. I'm trying. I mean, that's fine. She's still losing. I mean, the Republicans still got more turnout than Democrats did. One thing I will say too is that she has been running uh, a very good ad actually on the Epstein files, which now that story has. I mean, she was hitting her opponent Matt Van Epps for opposing the releasing the files. That's obviously less useful of a talking point now than it was a week ago. But look, at the end of the day, again, it's a very difficult race to win. And Dane, by the way, is pretty progressive. She's pretty far to the left.
She was the furthest to the left in the primary. And a lot
Right.
of people thought they need to nominate someone more moderate to have a shot in this district.
Right. Although the argument that I hear from people is that, well, that she's liberal. I mean, that's going to motivate Democrats. But my response is, well, anybody with a D next to me is going to motivate Democrats. I'm not sure that makes that much of a difference, frankly. And look, they've been attacking her as the AOC of Tennessee. They've been trying to link her to Mamdani. This is old hat in Tennessee. I covered the 2018 midterms down there. I spent a lot of time there. I was following a state Senate candidate named Gabby Salinas, who's now in the Tennessee House of Delegates and or not House delegates, the Assembly. Sorry, and she was young and she was from Ecuador, I believe, and they compared her to AOC, who, by the way, wasn't even elected at that point. She won a primary, but that's kind of they they use the sort of New York radical liberal to attack people, Democrats
Or
from
that was
Tennessee.
Nancy Pelosi, the San
Sure,
Francisco liberal. I mean,
sure,
they have a very tired, boring playbook of we're going to find some boogie person to link
yeah,
every Democrat to, and it's not particularly persuasive. I think that, it'll be interesting because Bain is running hard on affordability,
yeah,
and whether we see any crossover vote there is one thing. The other thing that, look, I want to stress I do not expect Afton Bain to win this election. However, were that to happen, Trump may rue the day that he decided to be very nasty and personal against Marjorie Taylor Greene and Tom Massey, because they will now be the sum total of the Republican majority after January 31st when the House has a special election in Texas. That's how narrow their margin is. And Jamie Raskin was trying to recruit MTG to the Democratic Party,
yeah,
talking about excusing terrible things. Um, but it's there's a lot of fluidity in a lot of this stuff. Trump is starting to crater again with people who are paying less attention to politics and are just dissatisfied with the economy. This
yeah,
election, I think, gives us a better gauge of things. And the reason I say that is the the Republican talking point after Virginia and New Jersey was, oh, they're blue states. This is a ruby red district. If this election is close, I think it's going to shift the media narrative.
Well, but you could look at Georgia too. Like Georgia, right? Trump won that state by a couple points in 2024. I mean,
Yeah.
you had this election. I know it's a
Public service
public
commissioners.
utility commissioner. Democrats won by 24. Two candidates won by 24 points in statewide race. I mean, that's a huge shift. Now, again, it's not as a high profile of a race, but it's a pretty
Right.
extraordinary shift.
Look, you and I agree on what they should be thinking and what they should be saying. We're telling people who are watching us, hey, this is where things stand. I don't think the media has gotten their heads around as a whole the fact that we are headed towards a big wave.
Yeah,
Um,
I
and
agree.
I think a close election here is going to change the media narrative. It's going to do things, first of all, that pisses Trump off. And that is good for Democrats because the more pissed off he is, the more unforced errors he makes. Um,
Okay, let's say that she wins, she loses by 5 points, and it's like a 17-point shift. That'll get a story for a day or two, but I think reporters will just, you know, I think it's hard for them to make the argument, well, this was a 17-point overperformance. I don't think that has the same kind of sexiness as, for example, if Afton Bain wins this election. Again, I
it's
don't think
gonna
she will. If she wins, it's an earthquake.
the
And
only the comparison to it is in 19 either 93, no, I think it was early 94. There was a special election. There was a guy named Jamie Whitten who had been in the House for like 40 years in
yeah,
Kentucky. He was a appropriations chair, I
right.
think. And he died. And there was a special election won by a guy named Ron Lewis, who was a Christian bookstore owner. Nobody thought the
Yeah,
Republican had a chance. And that presaged, the most famous wave of all time, or modern times.
the 94
And
wave.
right. That's what would happen here. Now, and again, I'm not saying that it's going to shift the coverage that much. I think it's going to shape how reporters approach the midterms, which is going to shape their coverage more subtly than, hey, this is going to be a 2 week story or something like that.
So, but I think on an immediate level, I think a lot of Republicans who might be on the fence running for reelection might
Yeah.
not run for reelection. I think also it would escalate the not retreat, distancing of Republicans from Trump. Look, I made a point yesterday. I think it's important to just bring this up that a lot of the reason why Republicans have not have stuck with Trump so assiduously is because they're afraid of a primary challenge, afraid of a MAGA primary challenge. Now we're now in the middle of November. Primary deadlines, well, two states have already passed, amazingly, Illinois and Arkansas, but they generally don't happen until March, April, sometimes earlier, sometimes December, sometimes January. But as we get close to these primary challenges, it's much harder for somebody to come out of the woodwork and challenge a Republican uh, House member. And so once we get close to the primary challenges and once we get past them, it's a lot of incentive for Republicans who are no longer worried about that primary challenge to distance themselves from Trump. And frankly, some of them are going to have to. I mean, I have been struck by how few of them have done so up to this point. I look at like Mike Lawler, who's in New York congressman in a tough race. He really hasn't done much to distance himself from Trump. And like, for example, made a big issue at the SALT deduction, which is a big issue in New York and blue states, ultimately into voting for the big, beautiful bill, even though it didn't have any SALT deduction relief for his constituents. Um, I how does that guy get reelected in a place like New York in a blue state, an election that's going to be pretty, which should be pretty good for Democrats? I don't know, and so I do think that for some of these members, this is going to be a road to Damascus moment, if you will, when
Right.
if Bain wins this race. I don't think she will again, but if she does,
Right.
my God,
Right.
it's an earthquake.
An absolute earthquake that will totally reset how we look at it, the state of things. I go my favorite example of the spineless Republican today. There was a story notice on Mario Diaz-Balart, who is a senior
Oh,
Republican
thank you for bringing up the
appropriations
story.
cardinal, and he put something in the defense appropriations bill that would have ended pocket rescissions. Briefly, a pocket rescission is there's this rescissions process where Congress gets to vote on the money that the president doesn't want to spend. But Russ Vogt, the director of Office of Management and Budget, came up with a new theory that they can pocket rescission things like a pocket veto. That if they do it
No,
inside,
can we restate that theory? It's the president can do what the fuck he wants to do. That's Russ
yeah,
Vought's theory. Yeah.
right. But basically, if they do it close enough to the end of the fiscal year that Congress doesn't even get a vote on this, that the president can just not spend the money. Well, Diaz-Balart put a provision in that 45 days the Congress would have 45 days to vote on this, and that it would reassert Congress's power. Well, Russ Vogt and the administration started leaning on Republicans, and Diaz-Balart caved. Now I'm thinking to
Caved.
myself as I read this story, you are a senior Republican. He's been in Congress for decades. You are literally handing over your own power to some unelected bureaucrat. And you're so spineless that you won't even stand up to him on this. And it just really blew my mind because there was an era, Michael, when
I know.
you had look, people were always partisan. People were always, brawlers. We don't want to lionize the past in the wrong ways, but they cared about their own power because they were normal human beings. These
Yeah.
people are so weird and so unusual and so spineless that they don't care about protecting
But
their own power at all.
it goes back to what I said a second ago. I mean, their biggest look, if you're a Republican, even if you're in a red district, which is if you're in a safe district, which is most Republicans, the only thing you have to fear politically is a primary challenge. You're not going to lose to a
Right.
Democrat unless even in the worst wave election, you're not going to lose to a Democrat. I mean, if you're a Tennessee Republican, I looked at this. These guys all won by double digits, some of them by 20 or 30 points. And you're not gonna lose there unless you go out and come against Trump, and then he'll push a primary challenge against you. If you're in a
Uh,
safe district, I mean, if you're in a swing district, you have a similar threat because okay, you're in great danger of losing your reelection Democrat, but your immediate danger is a primary challenge will kill you. So these guys have all made the decision that they don't want a primary challenge, and frankly, politically, it's the savvy move to make.
right. Well, I just had to look this up because I want to hammer home this point. Mario Diaz-Balart, I had to look it up because his brother was a congressman too, and I wanted to make sure I wasn't confusing him. Mario Diaz-Balart has been in Congress for 23 years. He's 64 years old. Comes from political royalty. His brother was in office for 18 years in Congress. His other brother is a major Hispanic television anchor.
Yeah.
Jose Diaz Balart. Like the name is worth a lot in South Florida. Okay. And this guy is rolling over. If this guy is rolling over and is more
How
worried about
safe
a
is how
primary check,
safe is his district?
I think it's gotten a lot safer because South Florida has shifted so much towards Trump. But I don't have the PVI in front of me.
But here's the thing, just to be clear, there's not going to be a MAGA primary challenge over the fact that the guy like put in a 45
Right,
day
right,
rule about
right.
voting on rescissions. Like he's just rolling over because he doesn't have the balls to stand up to the administration.
That's exactly right. That was my point. Is that there's nobody has any balls. These Republicans, they don't even have a self-preservation instinct. You look at the
No,
Mike
no, no,
Lawlers.
no, no, no. They do a self
You're
preservation
right.
instinct.
It's about primaries, but what I'm talking about is you don't see the Mike Lawlers of the world ever really rising up and see. We could talk about this a little bit, but the ACA subsidies. You've got these I refuse to call them moderates. I'm pausing because the press drives me crazy calling people moderates who are ideological conservatives who are just less right wing than some of their peers. But like they have this letter, they're begging. Jen Kiggins, Rob Bresnahan, these people are begging their
Tom
leadership and
Kaine,
Trump.
Lawler,
Tom Kaine, please do something
Valadao.
about this. Please, please,
Yeah.
please. We're gonna lose. And they send letters, Michael. Oh my God, you sent a letter.
Well, what are
You
they going to
you
do? I
recruit.
mean, they could sign a discharge petition, but
Well,
even if that
okay,
happens, the
but
Senate's not going to pass it.
okay, but what would the hard right do? What does the hard right do? They shut the House floor down. They say, "Yup, you'll get a vote on anything that you want to get a vote on." They say, "We won't vote for this thing." What they should have done had they had any brains and balls, is that big, beautiful bill. They should have voted no the first time, just like the right wingers do. You hold out, you vote no, and then you demand concessions.
Yeah.
This is actually a story that I have been harping on for years, and I don't think people get it right. The reason the Republican Party continues to move to the right is that the right wingers play hardball. They understand how to win
And
in
the
every way,
moderates
shape,
and
or
the moderates cave.
cave. And they've been doing it for 40, 50 years. They just
Yeah.
cave. Well, we're the good governance people. We're the team people. We've asked you, Mr. Speaker, nicely. We've tried. We did our best, but now we're going to vote for you. And,
I
and
mean,
it goes.
the
It's
best example of this, by
unbelievable
the
to me.
way, is David Valadao.
Valadao.
Yeah, in California. I mean, this guy is a district that Biden won in 2020 narrowly, but he won it. He has the largest number of Medicaid recipients in the country, and he
And
voted
he
for the
lost in the last Democratic wave in
he
2018,
lost
by
that
the way.
Democratic wave, right?
And they got
I
a
mean,
seat back.
I will mention one thing that's worth noting that the Trump tax cut bill that passed in 2017, a number of Republicans did vote against it. Mostly, Stefanik was one of them. A number of Republicans in blue states because of the SALT deduction, and those,
Right.
by the way, but just for the record, those members disproportionately lost in that in 2018
Right.
wave.
But first of all, it was a free vote because they knew they could vote against it and it was
Right,
still
but
going
it
to
didn't.
pass.
My point is, it didn't save them. Didn't
No,
save them.
and look, I'm not saying that this would necessarily save them. I'm saying your best shot of saving yourself if you are in a swing district right now is to differentiate yourself from Donald Trump immediately and
Well,
to show yourself fighting for your constituents against him. It may not save you. It may not be enough.
I
I mean,
think
we
it's
see
a,
this in every wave.
but I don't think it's going to save them. And I
No,
think the conclusion they're making, and this goes back to the why is Kamala Harris going to campaign for Afton Bain. I think the conclusion that they're coming to is that showing moderation isn't going like this. What I mentioned, the people who voted against the tax cut bill and the SALT thing, it didn't save them, right? In a highly partisan political environment, you're going to lose in a election. You're going to lose no matter what. The only way that you're going to win theoretically is if you can motivate your Republican base to come out and vote for you. And
that's right.
frankly, I'll give you an example of this. I mean, I think Ron Johnson, who in 2022, this is exactly the strategy that he utilized. A lot of people went to the middle, and you'd think Johnson would because Wisconsin is a swing state. He went to the right. He went he went far right, and to mobilize his Republican base. He had a weak opponent in Mandela Barnes,
Yeah, it
but
was
his theory of the race was I'm not going to be able to moderate. I'm not going to get Democrats to vote for me. I need to, or I'm not going to get in big numbers. I need to motivate my base. And you know what? It worked. It worked.
except that Tony Evers won on the same ballot. It wasn't so much that like right wingers showed up for Johnson. I think it was basically you had a left
Governor
wing
and Senate,
candidate.
governor and Senate are different beasts.
Yes, but I think it really came down to this. You had a right-wing Republican against a left-wing Democrat, and some of the people who voted for Evers for governor said, "You know what? We like the right-wing Republican better than the left-wing Democrat." In a
Yeah,
backlash
but
election, it was a Democratic president. Democrats had a trifecta. So I think that we're talking about very narrow differences. We're talking
I just
about
think you are. But in general, partisanship works better in a Senate House race as an gubernatorial race. Really harsh partisan campaigning is a loser in gubernatorial campaigns. And you live in Pennsylvania. You know this so as anybody. I mean, Doug Mastriano screwed himself by being so incredibly partisan. By the way, here's a little fun fact for you. I heard this actually. Josh Shapiro uh, told me this. Right? He's never actually met Doug Mastriano. Never met him. He's in the state legislature. He ran against him. They've literally never met in person. Never even spoken.
That's
Isn't that weird?
modern. That's modern politics.
Kind
The
of is,
guarantee of a
right?
debate doesn't happen
Kind of
anymore.
is. Kind of is.
What a weird
Isn't that weird?
situation. Hey, we finally got a budget in Pennsylvania last week.
Hey, congratulations.
It's talking about the state legislature and the governor. But let's pause for 1 second and remind people if you can hit that like button, we keep the audience just keeps growing, and we get more people to come here because we got something important to talk about next. We're going to talk about redistricting, maybe our favorite
Yes.
topic,
Yes.
because that very 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 bad week that Donald Trump is having, well, it got a whole lot worse on the maps, and that was because a Trump appointed judge. I'm waiting for the explosion. Once he gets done playing footsie with MBS at the Kennedy Center today, we're going to get the
Yeah.
explosion on the
Yeah.
ungrateful Trump judge who sided with the Democrat, 2-1 ruling saying that the Texas map that Trump pushed so hard for that ignited this redistricting war was a racial gerrymander, an unconstitutional racial gerrymander. And I like this judge's style. He started with a quote from Chief Justice John Roberts as a way because he knows this case is going to the Supreme
he,
Court now.
he was playing
And
to his audience, was he
yeah,
not?
he was playing to his audience of nine, and
Exactly.
really an audience of three, the chief,
Yeah,
Kavanaugh, and Barrett, to try to say, hey, uphold my ruling.
exactly.
And it was a 2-1 ruling. And look, I think the Supreme Court will find some way to overturn this, or pause it so that they can use their new map for 2026. But if they don't, this has the potential to be the biggest self-inflicted
Oh my
wound
God.
that we've ever seen politically because they ignited this war. Democrats had no idea, no thought to, hey, let's try to redistrict California or let's try to redistrict Virginia to steal seats, do unprecedented things. Democrats aren't that creative, Michael. We're not that good at these things. And then
No.
Trump did this in Texas. And if Texas doesn't shift their map, Democrats are going to end up gaining 3 or 4 seats out of redistricting. which would just be an epic blunder. Let's set the table for people. Republicans have a three-seat majority. So if Democrats gain 3 or 4 seats, that means they are now the favorites. Well, they're already the favorites, but that means that they are basically now the majority in terms of who has the most seats going in before you get to the swing districts. It would just be a monumental
So
self-inflicted wound.
So I wrote a piece about, I think it was last week, on going through all of the redistricting states where redistricting has happened. It's for those of you who are True Consequences subscribers. It's a paid, it's behind the paywall, so subscribe and you can read it. I really dug into this, and what came across to me at least is that you know at best Republicans are looking at maybe a 1 or 2 seat advantage. This is assuming Texas map stays and the Supreme Court stays this ruling. At best, Republicans are looking at maybe a 1 or 2 seats, and a lot of it depends on what happens in Florida. Florida is the one. So Indiana this week, basically, they're not going to have a special session. They're not going to redistrict. So Indiana's off the table. Kansas has already said they're not going to do it. Florida is the one that we are still waiting on, as well as Maryland and Illinois, although one of those looks more likely than the other, more possible than the other, I should say. So if you do the math, you got 5 in Texas potentially, although at least 1 or 2 of those seats now
South
look more
Texas.
in South Texas look more in play because they are the new maps are based on the assumption that Republicans will continue to maintain their support of Hispanic voters that they had in 2024. That particular view assumption, I think, was deflated by the results in New Jersey and Virginia, which saw Democrats do very well with Hispanics. So that's 5, but could be 3 or 4. North Carolina definitely get a seat. They help themselves with there. In Ohio, at best 2 seats, but more likely 1 seat, and in a wave election, 1 seat or maybe 0 seats. Missouri, where they did redistrict to get rid of Emmanuel Cleaver's seat, um,
That's
there's
going
a
to a
ref
referendum.
that if 106,000 people sign their name to a ballot referendum initiative, then that referendum will be the ballot in 26, and the maps will remain the same. So that will take away the 1 seat that Republicans could have gained. So you're looking at maybe, in a best case scenario, 8, 9, but more likely 5 or 6. On the flip side, Democrats have already gotten this one Utah seat, which, if this stands, it's almost certain that you'll get a Democratic flip because the district that they recut is like is up as a safe Democratic district. It's like a plus 12 or plus that's like 18 or
I think it was
20 Harris
plus
seat,
24 or something like that.
24 for Harris, yeah. And then
They
in
put all of
California,
Salt Lake City in one district. So
right,
that's like
right,
all of Utah's Democrats.
right. And then in California, you've got quite likely 4 seats look very likely. I think probably 5 in a wave election, probably 5. So you do the math on that, and it's basically a wash. But if you throw in Virginia, which has already begun the process of redistricting, you could be talking about 2 to 3 seats that are flipping. Maryland is still in play; that would be 1 seat. And so you could have a situation if Florida doesn't go forward with this. You see a situation which Democrats actually gain seats out of redistricting as opposed to losing. Now, if Texas the map reverts back to what it was before. My God. Now you're looking at a plus potentially 6 or 7, if not more. 6, 7. Sorry. For Democrats.
You're trying to be
And if
cool. Your kids are
I
going to
know,
be pleased.
I know. And if that happens, there is, in my opinion, zero chance Republicans hold the House in 2024, on 26. Zero
Yeah.
chance. I will say it now. If the Texas map, this core ruling is upheld, there is zero chance Republicans hold the House in 2026.
And there are other developments. Florida is going to have a commission meeting in early December. So we're going to get a sense of whether they can come together on something to take seats. But I don't think it's going to be that many because if they get much beyond 1 or 2 seats, they're going to risk a dummy mander where they hand Democrats a seat by cutting themselves too thin. Either today or tomorrow, there's a hearing in North Carolina on their remap and whether that is a racial redistrict and therefore is illegal, whether the judge is going to stop that. Obviously, the Voting Rights Act case in front of the Supreme Court looms over all of this, but it really does not seem like we're going to get a quick ruling in that case. It seems like a case, first of all, where the justices are going to write a lot on various sides of the issue, and that tends to push us towards spring before we get a ruling. So that's unlikely to. It would be really messy for states to try to remap after, even if they came down with a decision in like March.
Yeah, it
It would
would
be
be hard to do.
really,
Really
really
hard to
hard to
do.
pull off. And this just has a really just unbelievable blunder by the Republicans. Now, what's very interesting is the DOJ has sued over the California map, claiming that it is a racial redistrict, not a partisan one. And so we'll see. Like I could see the Supreme Court trying to say, well, we can't. Neither of these is allowed, or allowing both of them. I find it hard to believe they'd allow Democrats to have an advantage. I'm too cynical about the court, but
But the problem with that argument is that, I mean, look, the court doesn't give a shit about consistency, but it's pretty
no.
hard to say that like Texas's map and California's map are legal because they're racial gerrymandered, and then have the same court then decide in the spring that, oh, by the way, racially gerrymandered districts are no longer necessary or
Right.
needed.
Right. I mean, and I think that there will probably be some push within the court if they're going to get rid of the Voting Rights Act to say, well, Texas's map is fine because racial redistricting is fine. Um, but it's a complicated situation facing the justice. I keep checking Twitter because I keep waiting for Sam Alito, who's the circuit justice, to put this ruling on hold in some way, shape, or form. Um, because I just don't trust the court enough to do the right thing. But there's a real possibility, especially this is written by a Trump judge. This is not, like, oh, they drew an Obama judge or something like that, who wrote this opinion. Jeffrey Brown, I think his name is, or something like that. Um, and there's a real possibility here where Democrats gain 5 seats out of California, 3 seats out of Virginia, 1 seat out of Utah, plus nine, and they lose one out of North Carolina and maybe one in Ohio, like, something like that. Like, that's the worst case for Republicans, is all of a sudden Democrats gain 6 or 7 seats. And this matters because since the Civil War, the president's party has won seats in the House in the midterms 3 times. 1934, it was plus nine in the height of the Great Depression. 1998, when Newt Gingrich ignored all the polling that said that
Impeachment was
we shouldn't
unpopular.
impeach, like,
Yeah.
don't impeach Bill Clinton. We don't want this. They lost 5 seats, the Republicans. And in 2002, after 9/11 and the redistricting cycle as well, Republicans gained 8 seats in the House. All of which is to say, if Democrats maximize the districting, say they got like 7 plus 7, which is like their best case scenario. Now they're basically got a 4 seat majority going in. Well, now Republicans need to do something that is up there with those historic numbers for midterms to have any chance. I won't quite put it zero like Michael would,
I will
because
put it
I
zero.
hedge my bets. But I would say single digits at that point.
No
I
chance.
I don't trust consistency enough in the Trump era that I have to hedge the bets just a little bit.
You can hedge all you want to. I'm not going to hedge. If this tech, let me say for the record, I do not think I do. I should say rephrase that. I assume that the Supreme Court will stay this order, and they will probably use as justification that this matter is being decided with the VRA case. Now, one thing that is worth noting is that the primary deadline to get your name on a primary ballot is December 8th. It opened November 8th, it closes December 8th. This is in Texas. After December 8th, if there's a stay, I think that makes it, I don't know, makes it very, well, actually, wait, would it, I feel like it would make it impossible to change the map, but I guess you're working off of the new maps, right?
I mean, if they issue a stay and say they can use the new maps, I think they'll figure out a way to make it work. Like, I mean, they could always call the legislature back and reopen the filing deadline.
They could. They could.
But it's the whole thing is messy. I would expect to hear from the Supreme Court before December 8th. In fact,
I
I would
think so
expect to hear
too.
from them before Thanksgiving so that they don't run up against the holiday and then come back and have to deal with it the week after. But I don't know when. I don't think Texas actually officially appealed yet. So
No,
that's
they
the
did.
next step.
They
Oh, they
already. I
did?
think they already appealed. I mean, they're,
Okay.
look, they're going to
They,
appeal.
they, they, they're going, they've said they're going to, whether they've actually filed that where the court can weigh in. But I would expect to see that in the next week, the court ruling, the court weighing in. And if they don't, I think that Republicans are going to start to go crazy on this whole strategy. Already, some of the people who are losing their seats are losing their minds over this because they're like, what the hell was the point of me, walking the plank? Kevin Kiley,
actually,
especially from
actually, now I'm
California.
sort of beginning to wonder now because if the court ruled this, I mean, doesn't that mean the primary deadline is screwed up because the primary the Texas opened up um, the period where you could put your name on a primary ballot on November 8th. I assume they were using the new maps, but doesn't
Yeah.
this ruling say they have to use the old? I mean, actually, maybe they put a temporary injunction in place or something. I'm guessing the
Well,
court what the
I
court could do, the Supreme Court could do, they could say they could stay the ruling, which means that actually between now and December, if there's no decision between now and December 8th, then the court could say, well, these were the maps that people signed up for on the primary ballot, so it's too late to change it. We have to stick with the maps that the legislature rewrote.
that's a possibility. I assume that there's language in this ruling governing that and governing what they're doing with the filing deadlines. I mean, remember the filing deadlines are all arbitrary anyway in every state. They're set by statute, but the state legislatures have arbitrarily picked a
They
date.
could
There's
change
no
it. They could change it.
and there's also a question raised in this opinion. The judge took this head on. There's this thing called the Purcell principle, which is a made-up Supreme Court doctrine that basically says we're not going to allow you judges to change electoral rules close to an election. And the very, very, very fuzzy, ambiguous part is what too close to an election is.
Yeah.
The last time they did this, it was in an Alabama redistricting case where they actually eventually sided with the lower court on it. But it was like January or February of 2022 where they said, nope, it's too late. You can't force them to have new districts, not the ones drawn by the legislature. They get to stick with this for the 2022 cycle. But this is a really interesting thing because here we just got a ruling yesterday, so November 18th. The Texas legislature didn't pass these new maps until like August.
August.
So
August.
if they invoke Purcell here and they say, well, it's too close to election to change this for a court to change this, you are now opening the possibility. Somebody raised this morning that like a legislature could go out and say, um, only white people can vote and do it like 2 weeks before an election. And technically, then the courts wouldn't be able to weigh in. Like if you're opening the door to saying, we will not allow any court to block any electoral thing because of Purcell. There are real ramifications to this, and again, it's one of those
But
made-up doctrines of the Roberts Court.
But the court could just stay it and not give an explanation, which is what they do halftime on the emergency docket with Trump's thing. So I mean, to my look, this court is completely political. It's completely acting in ways that go violate the law, violate precedent, violate their own precedents. Um, so I just my assumption is that the court will find some
I
bullshit
agree.
reason to stay this decision. I mean, if they don't, I'll be very surprised. And if they
Uh,
don't, just for the record, if for some reason they let this stand, I would take that as a sign that they fully intend to gut the Voting Rights Act. In other words, this is the yin and the yang of that decision. In other words, they're going to like, we'll throw you guys a bone on Texas, but we're going to, for this election, but we're going to eviscerate the VRA for 2028 and pass
And
that.
it's worth noting that one constant pattern with this court is when the liberal justices win on something, it's usually a narrow technical kind of thing that saves them for today. But eventually, the conservatives end up winning on that point because they just bide their time. This is where Roberts disagrees with Alito in a lot of ways. Roberts wants to play a long game. He says,
Yeah,
we are still
that's
young
right.
enough
That's
and
right.
we control the court forever. And we are going to slowly gut things like the Voting Rights Act, do it over the course of 15, 20 years. We're not going to, do things. We're okay, liberals, you can win on this narrow point for now. When the conservatives win, it's these big, broad rulings. So it would fit with kind of with that pattern where I say, we're not going to upset this ruling. It was a Trump judge. We're going to let this stand. Republicans made their own bed that they now have to own this in 2026. But we're going to gut the Voting Rights Act and let them do whatever the hell they want for 2028 and beyond. Now, as
That's my
Michael and I have
assumption.
talked about, if that happens, what you're going to see is, especially if Democrats have a good midterm, enormous pressure on Democrats everywhere from Minnesota to Wisconsin to New York to New Jersey to start bleeding districts out of it, other places. And the only way this ever will all end is with some sort of national ban, because neither side can afford to unilaterally disarm. And if you get to the point, if they got the Voting Rights Act, Democrats will not hold a seat again in Alabama, Louisiana, Mississippi, maybe South Carolina. A little bit less certain there in like Michael and my lifetime. Because
Yeah,
they
let's just be clear on this point that Republicans have much more to lose if we go full on arms race with mid-decade redistricting. Republicans have much more to lose, right? So in Colorado, you go from a 4-4 to an 8-0.
yeah,
Oregon and Washington, you could see couple seats flip.
nothing left
Minnesota,
in Oregon. Or
oh right,
there is one. There's one.
there's one.
It's Eastern Oregon, whichever half, like it's like half the state in one congressional district because there's no people. I think they still have one seat. That maybe they
But
could
you could
come
see
for.
it. You could see it in New York. I mean, I talked to folks in Michigan, New Jersey about this issue, and their response to me was, we spend so much time in Michigan, especially. We spend so much time uh, getting a non
Independent commission.
independent commission that we're not going to undo that. And my response is, yeah, if the VRA gets gutted, you're going to be under a lot of pressure to change the rules. Same with New
Arizona is another
Jersey.
state that has an independent commission, and last cycle it went very well for Democrats. This cycle it went very poorly, but it's a place where a trifecta is not off the table in 2026. I mean, that's the other piece of this. If you get a Democratic wave, and this is what killed Democrats in the 2010s, Republicans had a wave in the redistricting cycle, and therefore they had trifectas and could do whatever they wanted in places. Republicans are not sensing the risk here, of Democrats having a wave in 2026, and now the rules are gone, so that or the norms that had said you don't redistrict mid-decade, and now they just do whatever they want. And then the next frontier in this, Michael, is that you get your trifecta, and not only do you gerrymander the congressional maps, but now you gerrymander the state house and the state senate maps,
Absolutely,
so that
absolutely.
not only do you protect your own power, but you protect the ability to draw those congressional maps, so that the next wave doesn't unseat you and
Yes,
doesn't hurt your party at the congressional level. I mean, there's some real profound democratic implications here, and this is all bad for the country.
it's all
But it
bad.
may be even worse for Republicans than Democrats, and Americans, if this, that they started a fight, that they showed up with a knife, and the guy who they were trying to assault pulled out an Uzi, kind of thing.
Right. I just think it's really important to understand is that you know for 2026, that's what we're focused on right now. And I think the most likely scenario is a wash with a potential +1 or +2 for Republicans if Florida redistricts, and +1 or +2 for Democrats if they don't. But the big issue is this VRA thing, the gutting of the VRA, Voting Rights Act. And if that happens, again, I think you will see a massive effort by Democrats in places where they control all three branches of government to redistrict. And you're already seeing it beginning in New York. You've seen some talk about it in Minnesota and Colorado and Washington as well. Although I think people are muted about it because I think Democrats don't want to do it, but I think they'll be under pressure to act. That's certainly true in Michigan and New Jersey, other places. But Pennsylvania, look, if Democrats win a trifecta in Pennsylvania, the pressure on them to redistrict is going to be enormous.
There are state constitutional provisions here that I
They
think.
can amend the constitution. That's what they're doing in Virginia and they did in California.
No, Pennsylvania is more difficult to amend the Constitution, and we don't have ballot initiatives. This is something, I think you have to have successive sessions of the legislature have to vote on something to get it onto the ballot,
Yeah,
for a constitutional amendment. The problem is that would require Democrats to control the state Senate for multiple
I'd say.
things in a row, and they haven't controlled the state senate in like 40 years or something like that. It's a more cumbersome situation here.
Right.
That's why we're the least likely place for it to happen. But I certainly think the intent will be there, and if the possibility arises, that it would be something that Democrats would entertain.
I
And the
mean,
other thing
just
about the
get,
VRA
yeah.
is, in some of these places, some of these majority minority districts, if you get rid of that, and Democrats can carve those up. They can spread a lot of Democrats around to Republican districts too. Like Richmond, you look at one of those places, like that, you start pulling those voters out, and all of a sudden you
Yeah, but
open up
most of
some
this is in
possibilities.
but most of this is in the deep South, and
Right, 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 right. Look,
for
it's
obvious reasons.
2 seats in Alabama, 2 seats in Louisiana, 1 seat in Mississippi. That's five right there that the Republicans will gain. One in South Carolina is six. And then I think there's one in Georgia, although Georgia's a place where if this is 2028, that may not happen because
Yeah,
if Democrats win the governorship, they can block anything
right.
that would happen. But like there's at least 5 to 7 or 8 seats in rock ribbed Republican states that they will steal.
Yeah.
And you will end up having a situation where you have, maybe 40% Democrats in the state and zero Democratic representation.
And just keep in mind that it could happen this cycle. Never put anything past this Supreme Court. They could very easily, um, make the decision that they could issue this ruling next week and
Yeah.
got into the VRA. I don't think they will, but I wouldn't be shocked at all.
Right,
It could
right.
happen
It's
it could
the
happen in
only
January or
person,
February. Yeah,
right. The only people who actually know when this ruling might come are the nine justices themselves and maybe some of their clerks. And then only the Republican state legislatures know how much they're willing to do to steal seats, how much they're willing to cost monetarily to hold special elections, how much they're willing to do, all kinds of gymnastics to ups. It's June and we're going to try to draw a new map for November. We don't know the answer to this. That most people seem to think, because of this is how this goes with the court, that this is going to come in the spring or summer, early summer, and then
spring,
that's going to be
spring.
spring, and then that's going to be too late for the Republican legislatures. But there's definitely going to be forces within the court that want to do this more quickly. Clarence Thomas was mad that they agreed to hear the case again and didn't just decide it based on last year's oral arguments. So he's one. And if this happens, it totally tilts the midterm playing field
My
significantly.
guess, I'm just going to speculate here that my guess is they'll push this to later because they don't want to look overtly political, and they'll push to 28. But
And the
would I
the
be shocked if it's earlier? No.
and the chief justice controls the release. That's the one kind of power they have is he can slow walk it or he can lean on people and say we're releasing an opinion on this date, get your writing done. And so he is the savvier of the conservatives in
Yeah, I
terms of
agree.
I'm going to play this slower so that we look marginally less partisan in terms of what we're doing. So I do think that the odds are that they're not going to do this now, because they want to be able to claim, well, we weren't trying to influence an election, we weren't trying to help Donald Trump or any of that kind of thing. And 2028, who knows who's going to win the elections in places, or who's going to control power and things like that. So it gives them a certain patina of plausible deniability, which will be total bullshit.
It's
But
bullshit, but that's what they'll
the,
do.
that's their kind of move. But realistically speaking, it's a be careful what you start in politics because you don't know how creative the other side can get, and what they're going to do. I mean, certainly, I don't think Michael or I, if you asked us in February or March, would have said to you, yeah, California Democrats are going to figure out a way around their state constitution, draw a new
Yeah.
map, and get 5 seats. I just would be like, are you talking about the same party that I've always known, kind of thing, like,
I mean,
but
frankly, as ballsy as that is, the Virginia move is even ballsier. I mean,
yeah, and my favorite is the Maryland State Senate president is standing in the way of Maryland getting rid of Andy Harris, the chair of the Freedom Caucus on the Eastern Shore of Maryland. He's like a good government guy saying, two wrongs don't make a right, and this is bad for democracy. And he said something about Virginia's elections proving that we don't need to do this. And Louise Lucas, the state Senate president in Virginia, said, like, get our fucking victory out of your mouth. Don't you dare use it for that because she's
she said
driving this
something
fight.
even more off color. I won't even
Oh
repeat
yeah,
here.
it was even more. See, I was paraphrasing. That's rare for me to be more off color, but they Virginia they passed a new map first week in November. Now they're gonna come back in January or a referendum to like suspend their constitution. They're gonna do it again the first week in
Amend the Constitution.
amend the constitution. They're gonna do it again in January. Then they're gonna probably have a vote on it sometime in the spring, and then they're gonna have like a special primary, and they will definitely gain at least one seat if this passes in Virginia that they would have otherwise gained. Two of the three seats that they can flip in Virginia are seats that Abigail Spanberger won, and they will probably flip anyway.
Yeah.
But there's a third seat in Central Virginia, my old district when I was in graduate school, where they'll pull parts of Richmond in and take a Republican district and make it a Democratic one, and that will be a straight up gain that Democrats never would have even conceived of had Republicans not started this war.
But by the way, I want to just say to your point a second ago, we should finish up in a moment here. But the your point about don't start a fight like this if you don't know how it's going to turn out. It's good advice. But I also think it's one of the reasons why I'm skeptical that Florida Republicans are going to go forward with this. I mean, I just it look. It's been interesting to see that in Indiana and Kansas, Republicans resisted the calls from Trump to redistrict. Same goes
Can we
for
talk about Indiana for a minute or
wait,
two?
one sec. But this is his point. Same goes with New Hampshire, which also resisted it. So I suspect that I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong, but I do think Florida they're going to see some of the problems in doing this, and I think that it's going to weaken some of their incumbents, and they're not going to do it. But yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
So I disagree with you on Florida for the simple reason that in Florida, the wings of the GOP are united. There's the DeSantis wing and there's the Trump wing, and they
Yeah,
both want to do this. I don't, like I said, I think they're gonna have to be very careful because if they go too far, especially in South Florida, they're gonna end up losing like 3 or 4 seats out of it. So I do think that there's a limit of maybe they gain one or two. It becomes more like, hey, we did this symbolically. Look, we gained a seat. Donald, give us our dog biscuit. We were good little pups.
yeah,
But in Indiana, I don't give Kelly Ayotte that much credit in New Hampshire for resisting because she's the governor, she's elected statewide, and it's a purple to blue state,
right.
like light blue kind of state. In Indiana, you had 19 state Senate Republicans siding, or was it? It was either 10 or 4 or 19, but like they voted with the Democrats to adjourn yesterday. And Trump has already targeted these people. One guy already got swatted on Sunday.
Yeah, I
Um,
saw that.
because after Trump called for them, and Trump has promised primary challenges. His thug of a strategist, Chris Vita, said that this was the end of the career of the state Senate President Rod Bray.
Yeah,
They've really held up to enormous pressure. Trump is apparently now going to call these guys to the Oval Office one on one, and they've really held up against enormous pressure. And unlike in Kansas, where there was a real argument of, hey, this might be a bad idea for us if we redistrict, we could cut ourselves too thin, and if we cut Sharice Davis out of a district, she might run for Senate and she just might win in a wave. In Indiana, they had none of that. It was simply, we don't think this is a good idea to get rid of both Democrats in the delegation in this way in the middle of the decade. And they deserve some plaudits for standing up to the bullying from Trump and his people. And it really shows the limits of power. A lot of these guys aren't on the ballot until 2028, and they figure
yeah,
Trump's influence is going to fade by 2028, or he might be so unpopular that he actually hurts their primary challengers, or he has
yeah,
so much ADD he forgets about it.
yeah.
But they really stood up, and it's a good thing for democracy, a good thing for the country, and it does show the real limits of Trump's pressure campaign and his reliance on primarying people.
Yeah, let's finish out that last point because it sort of brings us full circle. I mean, we've talked about the beginning of this marathon discussion today about Trump's unpopularity, and that is really the most important issue I think right now. But when a president's unpopular, it has an effect, and you saw it this week with. I mean, Epstein's a little bit of a sui generis case because I think it's the kind of issue that plays the Republican base. But at the same time, I don't think this vote would have turned out 6 months ago. I think you do have Republicans who are concerned getting as we get closer to the midterm, and I think that had a lot to do with it. But the fact that, as you said, he couldn't persuade Indiana or Kansas to go along with their districting. I do, and they put a lot of pressure on these guys. I do think it speaks to look, the Republicans have a problem. They have a post-Trump problem, and they there's two things here. One is Republicans have performed very poorly when Trump's not on the ballot. Um, Part of that's because they nominate bad candidates, but part of it's also because Trump brings out certain voters who only vote in presidential campaigns and don't vote otherwise. Now, that did not help them as much as you thought it would have in 2024, because in four of the five swing states that Trump won, just say in four swing states that Trump won, Democratic Senate candidates won. He wasn't able to drag Republican candidates across the finish line with him. You may have a situation in which Republicans are saying, we have a post-Trump problem and we need to figure out what to do with it. But I think what you will see more than anything else is you'll see less than Republicans standing up to Trump. Is Republicans simply saying, I'm done. And I do expect that there may be some more retirements between now and the end of the year. Because I think this is look, if you're not a full MAGA person, y- what have you generally done over the past 10 years? You've just walked away from politics. There's some who've spoken out, but generally speaking, you walk away from
Jeff
politics.
Flake, Bob
Jeff Flake,
Corker,
Bob Corker,
Lamar
Lamar
Alexander.
Alexander,
They just head to the
Rob Portman.
exits. Yep, Rob Portman,
They're
Roy
not gonna they're not
Blunt.
gonna they're not gonna come out against Trump, but it's clear they don't want to carry water for this guy anymore. And so they
Right,
walk
right.
away.
And I mean, Republicans have a lot of post-Trump problems. I mean, we haven't even mentioned the name Nick Fuentes the last couple of weeks, and the kind of civil war over the white supremacist young Trumpers that it's pitting like Ted Cruz against JD Vance in the preview of the hellish 2028 Republican primary. We may get
God
into
help
that at some
us.
point, but like they have that problem. And I do think that the resistance is going to be on things like redistricting or like Epstein, where you're not killing Trump's agenda. You're not doing something that is so visible that's going to make the base angry at you. Epstein, one Republican voted no in the House and the Senate total, and that shows you how as soon as they got clearance from Trump, they understood the politics of the issue. He was going to lose this vote because the politics of the issue were completely against him. And I think that there will be more of that where they're like where he's on the losing end of things. They're freer to oppose him as we head towards election day. But the other thing about Trump that you can never downplay. And we should have talked about this before when we're talking about the like Mike Lawlers of the world. I always come back to a guy, I think it was Eric Paulson was his name. Outside of Minneapolis, was a congressman in 2018, and Trump endorsed him because he knew it would hurt him. He gave one of those endorsements. It came out in one of the books at the end of the administration. Trump was mad at him about something, so he knew that Paulson didn't want him to get involved in the race because it was a blue district or it was a district that was swinging against Trump, so he endorsed him anyway. Trump is a spiteful son of a bitch, and that is always something that they have to watch out for.
The word you're
Uh,
looking for is asshole. That's what he is.
Asshole, yeah, that's right. I want to bring up one more asshole very quickly before we leave because we got breaking news.
Yeah.
Um, Lindsey Graham is doubling down, Michael. The Senate passed this provision last week that said that senators who were a judge approved a subpoena for their phone records into January 6th because, hey, they were involved in an insurrection in a lot of cases, or at least we're communicating about this. And the Senate put this provision in to let them sue the taxpayers, which, of course, knowing Pam Bondi means that they will settle this and basically hand our tax dollars to people. Well, most of the senators who could have done this quickly disclaimed this idea. All the Republicans in the House revolted. Well, we got one brave soul, Lindsey Graham, who has doubled down. He says he wants to expand this beyond the senators. The idea that I would sell this claim for 500,000 is silly. I'm going to make it hurt as much as possible as I possibly can, so nobody will do this again. I'm going to sue Verizon. I'm going to sue the Department of Justice. Lindsey, buddy, you're in cycle. You are handing your opponents the opportunity to take a race that should never be in play and probably won't be, but to make them say that you are literally trying to steal from the taxpayers. I haven't seen a dumber position taken by someone who is not Donald Trump in a very long time. So
It is rather foolish. And I'll leave, just want to, on that note, I agree with you. I don't understand the politics of it from Grant's perspective, but one thing I will say is that I think we have an assumption we have that Trump understands the MAGA base and his base very well. I think what we've seen also is, I wish I mentioned this earlier, but I think with the Epstein case, what you do see is that Trump's attunement with his base is not as strong as maybe we thought it was, because this was
Well,
a major miscalculation on his part.
the assumption comes from him. What did he say last week? I am MAGA. I created MAGA.
He
I
is
know
though.
these people better
He
than
is.
everyone else.
He is.
And maybe he doesn't know them as well as he thinks he does. And I think that's a good spot to stop. We should probably tell people we won't be here next week because I at least will be cooking and getting food and things.
Yes.
Have a wonderful Thanksgiving. We may
Yes.
record an interview with someone between now and our next live episode, which will be December 3rd. And on
Hmm.
December 3rd, Joanna Masca, who worked for Barack Obama, is going to join us for part of the time. Um, but we may record an interview because we're toying with doing a little interview segment on the side because it's easier for scheduling to bring guests in. So stay tuned for that. And otherwise, have a wonderful Thanksgiving
Have
to
a nice
everyone who's out
Thanksgiving,
there.
Brian,
Oh,
and
and
everybody listening.
yeah, and subscribe to both of us. I
Yep.
know I
Truth and
have a
consequences. The world according to Brian. Subscribe.
Yep, subscribe. I have a video that I'm gonna record in a little while for paid subscribers on Latino voters and what's actually happened with them. So that's a little teaser for you. But have a wonderful Thanksgiving, Michael. Have a wonderful Thanksgiving, everybody
You
out there.
too. All right. You
All
too.
right,
And we'll talk to you later. Thanks,
yeah,
guys.
take
Bye
care.
bye.
Bye.